All systems go. Clear for liftoff.
What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 2 showdown stream for the John Deere Classic. Gonna get you guys ready to build all your lineups with a look at the weather report, some strategy for Friday's slate, any questions or player deep dives that you've got for me in the live chat, and we'll wrap it up with some strategy as well. So hopefully the Thursday is treating you guys nicely. Tomorrow is, of course, the 4th of July, so a lot of us Americans will be celebrating that, and we will also still have a round 3 showdown stream tomorrow, so still gonna be grinding it out even on the holiday, but hopefully everyone has some nice celebrations planned. And tonight, gonna watch some fireworks. Might have to follow up Joshua and get some pizza as well. But welcome on in. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. And hit me up with any specific questions that you got. We also got Go Collect down there. And yeah, like you said, only the sweatiest of tryhards are here. It's one of those kind of days, one of those kind of slates, but we wouldn't have it any other day. And Steven with the line from Oprah, you get a birdie, evening all. It's that kind of golf course. And, you know, it's that part of the schedule. Last week was the same way, but it's let's embrace it because the Open Championship, the Scottish Open, is right around the corner, and those are not going to be pushover. So glad to have you in here, Steven, and let's get this thing rocking. So first things first, the golf course today played a lot easier in the morning. So if we split it by morning versus afternoon, play is still finishing up right now. So these numbers are going to move around a little bit. But as of right now, it's about a 1.7 shot difference between the morning and afternoon. So clearly those winds kicking up wreaked havoc on this golf course and the golfers in the afternoon. And I don't think it was just the wind kicking up, but also the course getting firmer and faster. It was already pretty bouncy to start the week, but by the time they got to that PM wave, you had guys hitting shots that were landing on the front of the green and sometimes even going over the back with long irons. So this golf course nowhere near as scoreable as what it was for last year. And tomorrow with the winds kicking up in the PM wave, I do think it's going to favor the morning guys again, but it's worth noting that the wind is going to kick up a little bit earlier than it did for today. So a 1.7 stroke difference is probably unrealistic for round 2. So speaking of, let's show you guys that forecast. So we got Deere Run up here and the HRRR forecast. In the afternoon, the winds are a little bit more significant. The wind gust as well, they're a little bit more consistent in the afternoon, but the sustained winds kick up a little bit earlier than today. So rather than around like 11 to 12, like we mostly see on the PGA Tour, tomorrow, if this forecast comes to fruition, it's going to kick up closer to 8 or 9 a.m. So if that's the case, it's not going to be as big a difference. But, you know, the one aspect that isn't going to change from day to day is that the golf course is going to get really crispy in the afternoon. The greens are also going to be less pristine, a little bit harder to putt. You saw that with a lot of missed shorts putts in the afternoon. Like Simi Valimaki, he 3-putt from like 3 feet or something like that. Just like unheard of stuff from some of these tour players. And I think a lot of that had to do with conditions. So tomorrow I will be favoring those morning starters. Haven't built my player pool yet, but heading into the slate, I probably want at least like 60% of my guys from the morning wave. But that's not to say that I'm completely eliminating the PM side, because if there are players that fit the shots gained record that we're looking for, you know, I might try and squeeze them in from the PM side because, you know, it's not nearly as big advantage as what we had for round number 1. So we'll see how it all shakes out with my exposure. But as of right now, that's how the weather looks. We're going to look at a few other models just for completion's sake here. So this model looks pretty similar to today, at least with the HRRR that we had for round 1, where it was going to be pretty calm in the morning, but also relatively calm in the afternoon. So this one also looks like a washout, I would say, maybe less of an advantage than we had in the HRRR. This GFS model, similar type of story. It does look a little bit more significant in the afternoon, but once again, the sustained winds are kicking up closer to 8 or 9 a.m. And then the last one we'll go with is the NEM model as well, which is calling for almost the exact same kind of scenario. So that's why I don't think there's going to be as drastic a change, which makes me kind of glad that I played the main slate straight up. I didn't stack it too heavily in either direction. In fact, I didn't have any rules set in my kind of exposure, but there's a chance, at least based on what I see right now, that the AM PM side could get like a quarter stroke advantage. Now, is that going to really matter when it's all said and done? Who knows? Probably not. It's only like a quarter to a half a stroke advantage, but we'll see how tomorrow plays out. If tomorrow is a little bit flatter, that's where we could get that quarter to maybe a half a stroke advantage towards that side. But for round 2 showdown purposes, I would favor those morning guys for sure. So just to give you an idea of some of those players, we got the tee times up on this tab. You can see the first group out would be Kyle Stanley, Hahn, and Norlander. And maybe outside of a Norlander, not a lot of players there that you might want to play. But more realistically, your Putnams, your Collies could find your way into your player pool. Maybe even a Dylan Fratelli with his course history. He played a lot better today than I was expecting him to. Still went over his strokes line for me, but made it a lot more of a sweat than I at least was anticipating. But you could also throw in like your Hardys, Echeverias, Tom Kims that are teeing off earlier. And this is an Eastern Standard Time, but keep in mind that they're an hour behind. So their tee times are really like 7:18 for these guys that are listed at 8:18. So they could get 2, maybe 3 hours of play in before those winds kick up. And I would say like the earlier tee times on this AM wave are really the ones that I would hone in on if you're trying to find a weather edge. Like Mark Hubbard, for example, like he's another guy that you could throw in going off early, as Sam Ryder too, because if there's going to be, let's say, one stroke advantage between the AM PM wave, I think it could be closer to like 1.25 to 1.5 shots for the first maybe hour of tee times, just because they're going to get even more of that weather edge than per se the guys going off towards the very end of the morning wave that might only have like an hour of that weather edge to deal with. So, it's not as straightforward of a weather edge as we sometimes have, where it's AM versus PM and then the weather changes around midday. It usually works out that way. I'm not quite sure why. I'm not a meteorologist or anything, but that is really the most common weather situation that we see. This time it's a little bit more nuanced. So on top of just saying that I think the morning guys are favorable, especially the guys that are going off early. So you might want to keep that in mind as well. The next thing that we'll talk about before we talk about any specific players or deep dives that you've got for me in the live chat. So feel free to go ahead and hit me up with any players now that you want me to go through the stats on. But before we even talk about the shots gained metrics, let's mention ownership for round number 2 showdown, which tends to be very predictable and play has not finalized quite yet. But we know that in general, the top end of the leaderboard is going to be where the vast majority of your ownership is going to be. And, in general, right, the guys towards the top are going to be higher owned than their peers. The 6K players, you're probably still only looking at like 2 to 3% ownership at the very most. So, for example, Justin Lauer, in the first set of projections that I was running before I got on here, I was already starting to run through some sims, get an idea of where the field's likely to come in. Justin Lauer had it like 2% ownership, despite him having one of the best rounds of the day. So maybe it's not such a big deal with like a 6K player. But when you're looking at a Michael Kim, for example, or if you're looking at somebody that's further up the board, like a Siwoo Kim or a Ricky Fowler, a Cam Champ, even those 7K range players are a little bit more viable to that chalk. Those kind of guys could be 10 to 25, even 30% owned in some cases in that 9 and 10K range. So the reason why we want to worry about ownership and we want to know where a lot of the field is coming in is so that we can play against it. DFS on a site like DraftKings and FanDuel is played against the rest of the field. You're not just trying to get the best lineup, but you're trying to get the best lineup compared to everyone else that you're playing against. So heading into a slate like tomorrow, it's good to know where the rest of the field is putting their marbles, so that if they get things wrong or you want to try and get somebody that's a better play than who everyone else is getting onto, you can try and leverage against that. And because golf is one of the harder to predict sports that we have in the DFS space, it's up there with MMA DFS in terms of being hard to get the exact point projections down. What that means is that you want to embrace that variance in that game theory even more so than other sports like football or basketball. Football, basketball, a little bit more predictable than at least what we have here with golf. So in those sports, you might see some of your pros playing chalk a little bit more often. In golf, though, when you look at the top players in the world for playing PGA DFS and you look at their portfolio and where they're getting their leverage, there might be a piece of chalk or two that they're getting over the field on. And in most cases, by the way, they're really committing to those players. If somebody's going to be like 30% owned, they're using them in at least half their lineups, right? They're not half-assing it. They might even lock a player if he's going to be that popular. But you're also going to see a plethora of low-owned owned plays, where if they end up getting that player to shoot something like -5, -6, they're not going to be sharing them and holding hands with 10 to 25% of the field. So that's why in general, we want to avoid, and I want to say every single player that you see here at T9 or better, but in general, the vast majority of these players that you see towards the left are not going to be in my lineups. And really the only sort of exceptions might be players that aren't getting the kind of steam as they probably should. Like most of them are getting more steam than a lot of their peers. But if there's a lot of chalk in the same portion of the board, which for example, there's a lot of chalk that's lining up in the 8K range right now in Showdown, that could take away ownership because not everyone can be high owned in that range. So perhaps you might be able to like squeeze in an 8K guy that's a little bit more chalky for round 2. But when you're looking at the 6 and 7K range and those players being 3 to 5 times higher owned than a lot of their peers behind them, they're almost automatic fades in every single case, unless the shots gained profile, unless the round 2 historical stats, whatever you're using to build your player pool, is just so damn convincing that you can't get off of that sort of play. You're likely going to want to try and take that game theory pivot and find guys a little bit further down the board. So that's the ownership angle. The further up the leaderboard you go, the higher the ownership is going to be. There will be some exceptions because of the price tag movement. You know, if somebody's like a glaring value, even despite not having their best stuff, maybe they still get a little bit of steam, but in the vast general, like if you make a generalization for the field, that is going to be true. Before we go through any specific player pool deep dives that you got, again, throw them in chat when we get to that section. We're going to talk about the shots gained in general. So when I'm trying to build a player pool, which is what we're going to go ahead and shift our focus into now, there's a few different ways that I do so. So before we even talk about the shots gained metrics, sometimes I just look for high upside players, guys that make a whole bunch of birdies or better. You can look at the birdie or better list on the PGA Tour website. You can go onto any golf database, look at birdie or better percentage over the last 24 rounds, whatever sample size you want. Guys that can post a lot of birdie or better firepower are always going to be preferable in this format because unlike main slate, unlike Sunday Showdown, rounds 2 and 3 Showdown, we don't have placement points in play. It is all about the raw birdie production that you're posting, maybe a streak, maybe a bogey-free round that is boosting that up. But the vast majority of your scoring for round 2 and 3 Showdown, it's just literally how many birdies can you post? Like, can you make 7 or 8 birdies? You got a chance to make it to the optimal lineup. So why not look at the top end of those lists, try and find a few players that way. You can also look at course history. This is a golf course that we see a ton and have seen for the last 15 years on the PGA Tour. So if you want to try and take a look at course history, I think that could be very useful to try and find some leverage plays. And the best sort of plays to find with those kind of stats would be your lower owned diamonds in the rough, because you know, when we're looking at the shots gain metrics, as we're about to do here, a lot of these guys play decent rounds because if you're going to gain strokes to the field with your ball striking, you're going to have to be better than average, or at least probably about an average player to go out there and do so. A lot of these guys that we're going to talk through in a second might have slightly higher ownership than some of the other players in the field. But if you need to find some sub 5%ers, you need to find a sub 10%er towards the top end of the board, taking an aggressive birdie maker is a really good way to do so. Taking somebody that's had a lot of success around TPC Deere Run could also be a really solid way to get some of that leverage. But when you're trying to make a little bit more of a convicted play and you have to play somebody that's maybe average to slightly above average ownership, a good way to do it is with the ball striking stats. So it's usually my go-to with the round 1. Again, some of these players are going to see movement as they're finishing up their rounds. But in general, whenever the round is finished, you're going to see me looking at these shots gained ball striking poppers. And some of them will be chalky, like especially a Doug Gim who had a hole out eagle today. Austin Eckroat also had a hole out eagle, so his stats are a little bit inflated. Rico Hoey, though, he also had a hole out eagle on hole 5. What is it about this golf course and guys just hooping it for eagle? Kind of fun, though, that they're able to do that so often around this kind of track. I mean, there's sometimes even whole events where we don't see that happen. And there are 3 guys at the top end of the board that did it themselves, let alone the chance that somebody else in the field, maybe even 1 or 2 people added on top of that towards the middle to the bottom end of things. Outside of some of the outliers, maybe like those top 3 players, a Ryan Gerard who gained a bunch of strokes ball striking but lost putting could definitely be on my list. A Jake Knapp who did it the same way, gained over 4 strokes ball striking but lost over 2.5 strokes in the short game. These are the kind of players that I'm really eyeing up. Not so much like these top 3 that, you know, even at Hoey, I think we'll get some extra ownership for tomorrow because Gerard's T41, a Knapp is T41. They're not going to be nearly as popular as some of those other players. So you could still play a piece of chalk. Like I said, it's not a complete death sentence to just play somebody that's higher owned. It's not who you play, it's how you play them. But it is really nice to find somebody that makes sense in your projections, makes sense in your process, and that isn't getting that kind of steam, because if you get them right, you're going to have a whole lot more utility with that sort of player. So, while it's nice to see a Lauer, a Kevin Yu gaining all these strokes ball striking, they're a little bit close to the top end of the board for my liking. They're going to get a little bit more steam than I'm hoping for. Same thing with like a Sam Stevens, a Max Homa here. But a Seamus Power, same thing. He gained about almost 4 strokes in the ball striking categories. He lost a little bit over a stroke between the around the green and the putting. He could be a decent bounce back candidate. He's not going to be chalk. I know he's T24, but because he has terrible form heading into this event, Seamus Power, at least in my first set of projections, was like in the 3 to 4% range. So not getting nearly as much steam as some other guys that are towards the top end of the board there. Like an Eckroat, for example, might be double the ownership of a Seamus Power. And if Seamus is going to be half the ownership, he's got a really good stat profile still gaining ball striking, but losing in the short game categories. These are the sort of players that I use the shots gained metrics to get on. And the short game stats, it's worth mentioning this as well. It's not like gaining a bunch putting in around the green is an immediate death sentence, but it is a massive red flag because these sort of players, it's really tough to go out there and gain 4 to 5 strokes short game very often. So with David Lipsky, by the way, who's not a very good putter, he's not going to gain over 5 strokes putting more than once, maybe twice an entire year. A Victor Perez is a bit of a streaky putter, so he does that a little bit more often, but still, gaining almost 5 strokes on the greens is not something that is repeatable or sustainable over an entire event. Hoshino, Higo, Homa, Ventura, Suber, you name it. These sort of players, especially the ones that gained across both short game categories, but the same thing can be said about the around the green stats here as well. If you were short game dependent and average to below average with the ball striking stats, ball striking, by the way, if you guys are new to golf, is off the tee plus approach. It's just adding those 2 categories together. If you were average to below average in these 2 categories and carried yourself with the short game, unless you're completely unowned, like you're a super low owned player, there's no chance I'm going to be using those guys. It's just they're cross off spots for me. It's a big red flag when you're not doing it in a sustainable fashion. But if they are low owned, and let's say they make a whole bunch of birdies, or they are low owned and they are a good course history guy, then there's a chance I could still play a guy like that, because the shots gained metrics aren't the end all be all. But at high ownership, guys that are getting that steam, they are pretty close to the end all be all for me. So that's how I use the shots gained metrics to my advantage. And by the way, if we take a look at the people that lost a whole bunch of strokes in the short game, it's not like it's an immediate like green flag or a good thing that these guys were terrible in the short game categories. But if they were respectable with how they were hitting the ball, and then they lost a whole bunch in those 2 categories. So short game, by the way, is just around the green plus putting, just like ball striking is off the tee plus approach, right? It's just a way to kind of like shorten adding those 2 categories together. These sort of players could be bounce back candidates. So for example, a JT Poston, who has fantastic course history around the John Deere, he was a gainer with the ball striking today, not a big gainer, right? Just about a quarter of a stroke per round there, but he lost almost 5 strokes short game. That is very hard to believe that's going to happen in back-to-back rounds, because Poston is maybe not an elite putter this year, but historically is an elite tier putter on the PGA Tour. And some of these guys that lost ball striking, like an Endicott Phillips, unless they're completely unowned and you're using them as a GPP flyer, like probably no thank you. But Enrico Hoey, he hit the ball great today. He'll probably be a little bit too chalky for my liking. But when you look at like a Ryan Gerard, a Luke Clanton, who lost over 3 strokes with a putter, those are the sort of bounce back spots I'll be getting on. And by the way, just to remind you with Clanton, there was a round last week where Clanton lost 5 strokes putting to the field. The next day, he gained about 2 strokes to the field and had one of the lowest rounds of the entire day. So, that's why I look to a lot of those players as a bounce back. And that is exactly what I'm using to get onto my plays. It's either a ball striking popper, a short game regression candidate, or a high upside or a course history guy. And if it's not one of those 4 reasons, you're not going to see them in my player pool for tomorrow. So on my Patreon page, for example, like I have my projections, of course, player pool on there, but literally I have one of those 4 reasons I just mentioned down as my reasoning for playing anyone that's in my player pool. So I'm always a big proponent, guys, of with your own process of having a rhyme or reason for why you're getting to certain plays. It gives you a way to check yourself afterwards, to try and improve your process, figure out what went right, what went wrong when you're looking at the shots gained metrics. And of course, it just helps you clean up the process. Take some of those nasty plays that you're throwing in for no reason, and takes them out of the mix there too. So check out the Patreon page for all my player poll and projections. projections. The Ship It Nation Stone later on as well, by the way, guys, is going to have projections on there too, which is also important for a showdown slate like this, because I mentioned that game theory angle. I mentioned the fact that the top end of the board is in general going to be higher owned, but you want to know pretty close to exactly where they're coming in, because that is where you can actually start to think about the game theory, the pros and cons to getting to a piece of chalk, and can start to make some of those decisions properly. And if you don't have good projections to rely on, like on my site or the Ship It Nation site, then you're going to be in the dark a bit when it comes to your round 2 and 3 process. So that's why I recommend you guys check out those sites if you guys haven't already. And let's go through any player pool deep dives that you've got before rounding this off with a lineup or two. So where did we leave off? And didn't mean to stop sharing that. So let's get to resharing it and catch up on the live chat. So where were we at? What's going on, Kep? Thanks for the show. Of course, thank you for always showing love on these live streams. By the way, guys, if you haven't already hit that like button, go ahead and do so for the Ship It Nation crew so that we can grow the channel even more. Can I deep dive Snedeker? He's been playing really well recently. And yeah, he's been sneaky good. I mean, it's been some weak field events, but he's been, I guess, outside of the the one signature event that he nearly won. I mean, that was nuts. He had that near 59 at one point. But yeah, T25 after round 1, and he gained on approach, he gained off the tee, then lost with the putter. This stat profile, by the way, for Brandt Snedeker is as favorable as you're going to find, because at this stage of his career, the putting is by far the best part of his game. It's normally what carries him in a lot of these tour events. The ball striking is usually very hit or miss. There are a few rounds where he'll really shine, like when he had that super low round where he looked like the vintage old world #1 Brandt Snedeker, but most times he's losing to the field in those two categories. So the fact that he gained over a stroke and a half between the off the tee and approach play is beyond impressive. And the fact that he has room for improvement with the putter is also a very, very good sign. So it's still Brandt Snedeker. Don't get your hopes up too much, as he's a bit over the hill to say the least. But like you said, sneaky good recently, and the shots gained metrics are mighty fine as well. It's the legendary micro edge for the early guys. That is it. Yeah, first hour and a half, 2 hours, what I would look at for that. Will the Audric Putt Guider return to a top 10? It'd be kind of nice to see that, man. I thought he might take a step back with it being a really big win for him, but he got off to a really good start today. So we'll have to see what happens over the next few rounds. Fellow sweaty tryhard year. You'll love to see it. Keith Mitchell gained across the board today, and you liked him in week long for his birdie percentage. Me too. I was on him, and they said, how do I feel for him for showdown? So he did make a lot of putts, and some of them were for par today. That surprised me. He misses a lot from 5 to 7 feet, and he was rock solid in that range. So I do have slight concern that the putting could come crashing down to the earth. And because he's T17, and I think he's going to be a little bit more popular for round 2 showdown, I'm personally probably going to stay away. I also think that he's a PM wave player. Let's just double check when he's teeing off. If he's PM wave, then yeah, he's PM wave. So he's likely not going to make himself into my lineups, because he was borderline to begin with the ownership, and he's on the wrong side of things with that slight edge. So yeah, not my favorite play for showdown, but I think you were onto something when it came to the main slate play. Birdie or better percentage was one of my key stats for this week. It still is for round 2 and 3 showdown as well. But those same kind of players that I like for rounds 2 and 3 showdown, I played a lot of in main slate too. So, if the ownership's there, I could see myself, but I have a sneaking suspicion when I run my projections, it's going to be closer to like 15% on showdown. What's going on, Joseph? Welcome on in. He said Mitchell cannot finish. Yeah, if you're going to play him, make it round 2 or 3 showdown. Round 4 showdown is not the place to do it. He said, Michael says, thanks, Luke, as being a valuable part of your process. Of course. What's going on, Title? Welcome on in. Long time no see. And you got Wayne, he says, worst 10K range ever. Yeah, it's one of those weeks, man, huh? I mean, if we just sort it by the DraftKings price, Jason Day was your highest priced player this week. Ben Griffin is now the highest priced player for round 2 showdown. So they did kind of account for that and fix the pricing up top. But outside of Ben Griffin, nobody should be in the 10K range. So I'm right there with you, my man. He said, Luke, who do we like tomorrow? So you might want to scroll back and look through the shots gained metrics, man, because we just talked about that quite a bit. So I'll let you do so and get the full deep dive. But let's go through some strategy on DraftKings. So in terms of the contests that are available, we want to make sure that we're in sustainable contests, but the contests for tomorrow are utter crap. I mean, there's just no way to gloss over it. The contests are some of the worst that we've seen for the last few months, which makes sense because this is a smaller field event. It's not a signature event. We do have some some pretty big weeks coming up with the Genesis Scottish and the Open Championship. So maybe they're taking it light before they really go heavy for the next week or so. But if I'm going to enter anything rather heavily with GPPs, it would be this Drive the Green, because it is a 6th to first place, which isn't the most top heavy payout structure that we've ever seen in this contest. Like sometimes it's a 5th, even a 4th to first place, especially when we have these smaller contests on a slate like this. But at least they kept the Drive the Green respectable. So I'll probably throw 50 lineups into there. And then on top of that, it's things like the long drive, some of the single entries that you're going to see me playing. This one is 15% to first, so the payout structure isn't ideal. Normally we want 10% to first, but 15% to first really isn't the worst. It just makes it a little bit flatter with the rest of the top 5, top 10. This one, you can see, is also a little bit more top heavy than normal. So normally the dog leg is a 10% to first. This time it is a 6 to first. So maybe I stay away from that one this time around. Just go with that 15% to first, $100 single entry. And then you also have this $12. So let's look at the Albatross. That one is 12% to first. So it's pretty close to that 10% mark that we're looking for. You're going to see me in that, $5 Drive the Green, as I said, probably the $100 single entry. And that might be it. When we don't have the best contest to enter, I normally scale back my exposure a little bit as well. So it's just the prudent thing to do, at least if you want to have those sustainable results. There are still some smaller, GPPs you can enter, like 2 to 3 maxes. There's still even some 20 max contests that you can find to your liking. They're just not going to be those massive 10K, 20K to first kind of payouts that a lot of people are looking for on this kind of slate. So in my opinion, it's more of a slate to try and grind out some ROI and don't get too crazy with the contest that you're entering. And then when it comes to lineup construction, that's really what I want to focus on here. Anytime we're in a round 2 or 3 showdown, it's all about getting as much leverage as we can into these lineups. And I don't think there's really a cap to how far you can push it. If you want to have a pivot in 5, maybe even 6 spots in your lineup, I'm not against that without the placement points. Now, do you have to have a pivot in 5 or 6 spots? Absolutely not. I think 2 or 3 would be the threshold for where you want to get to with pivots. 2 pivots if you have 2 guys that are like 2 sub 5 percenters. 3 pivots if you're talking about guys that are like sub 7 to 10% owned. You'd be okay in most contests if you have that many pivots. But really, I mean, if you like a bunch of guys that are low owned, a bunch of guys that are sub 10%, don't be shy about mixing them in together. And, maybe you have somebody like a Ben Griffin that you're throwing in, who, by the way, Ben Griffin could not make a putt today. So I think that he's going to set up rather well for round 2 showdown. He also has an AM tee time. So, let's say you want to use some Griffin chalk, who will probably still be about 30% owned tomorrow. At the very least, I'd say like 25% owned in GPPs. We'll have to see where my ownership projection comes in. But as of right now, I think I had him at like 28%. So still getting quite a bit of steam. He did finish a little bit worse than I thought he did. Let's actually refresh this and see where Ben Griffin rounded it off. Let's see. So yeah, still at even par. Wow. So maybe I'm going to have to drop down that projection a bit. I thought he would have finished at like -2, -3, and was kind of accounting for that. So if he's only going to be 25% owned, so that's still, by the way, going to be the highest ownership of any of these players up top. We're going to have to compensate that a little bit further down the board. So let's throw in a Ben Griffin. Let's go with the Thor Bjornsson as well, who I also think has a morning tee time, but I just want to double check on that. So yeah, Thor Bjornsson's going off at 8:40, which isn't like one of the first few groups off, but it is early enough to where I think he could be getting a little bit of an edge. Same thing with Ben Griffin. He doesn't have an ideal tee time for what we're looking for. I mean, ideally, we want the guys that are in the first few groups off of tee times. But Ben Griffin, for example, if we can find him on here, a lot of Bens in the field, evidently. Where's Griffin? I must be overlooking him here. Let's type in just Griffin and make our life a little bit easier. So yeah, he's at 840, just like Thor. So that's why I didn't see him. He was literally right next to it, right in front of my eyes. But yeah, they don't have like the perfect tee times, but maybe we can target some of those perfect tee times for our next few plays. So actually, just looking at this, I think a Mark Hubbard can make a little bit of sense. He's not going to be super low owned, but he is going to fit the tee time situation that we're looking for. And there are other players that we can differentiate with. So yeah, let's use him. And let's also throw in either a Davis Thompson, a Glover, or a Day. And I'm kind of siding towards Day. It would be expensive to take him. But if we take Jason Day, it is going to give us a low-owned player that's going off in the morning wave, and also a player that could be due for a little bit of a bounce back. So yeah, let's throw in Jason Day. Let's also throw in Mark Hubbard, who's at $7,600. And I guess that's way too expensive. We're going to have to take away one of these top 3 players. In fact, let's take out Jason Day then, because I do like Griffin Thorbjornsen just a little bit more. Thorbjornsen, by the way, he's not going to be nearly as chalky as what he was for main slate. And I still think he fits this golf course quite well. I didn't play him for main slate, but in round 2 showdown with the morning tee time and slightly lower ownership, you can count my ass in. I'll definitely be throwing him into a few lineups. And let's see who we can find in the morning wave. I don't think there's a bunch of morning guys going off in this portion of the tee times. Let's see. Off memory, at least a lot of them don't stand out. Let's see when Hisatune is teeing off. Because Hisatune, he played well. So yeah, he's a PM tee time, unfortunately. I wish I had my cheat sheet done so I could just go through this rather quickly. But see, let's go through Perez. Let's look at Hodges too and see if one of those two is morning. There's not a whole bunch of them in this range. I already know it ahead of time, though. So yeah, Perez isn't. Let's look at Hodges next. Hodges is morning wave, so we could throw Hodges in there. And Hodges at -3, he's not going to be low owned, but he's also not going to be chalk at that sort of number. Now we're left at about $7,300 remaining for our last few spots. I mean, Smalley would be a good piece of leverage. I know he's over par, and I believe he's also morning wave, but let me double check on that. So yeah, Smalley's morning wave. Andy's going to be super low owned, so he's that piece of leverage that we're kind of looking for. And a reason to get on to Smalley, by the way, he's a high birdie percentage player. He's a top 25 player in the category. So like I said, if I'm looking for those diamonds in the rough, it's those high upside players, it's those course history guys that I'm really first getting to. So this kind of lineup construction, we've got a 25%er, probably at least a 15% Thorbjornsen. Sure, he's lower owned than main slate, but he's not going to be low owned. At $9,400. He's still going to be getting some steam because of how many people liked him this week. But you've got, let me double check on Hubbard's tee time. Yeah, he was AM wave, right? Yeah, he was one of those first few tee times out. So all AM wave players in this lineup, and that fits the ownership angle as well. We've got a lower owned Alex Smalley, a lower owned Mark Hubbard, who was mega chalk this week, by the way. He was way higher owned than I thought he was going to come in. He was like 15% plus owned in all the big GPPs. Tomorrow, though, because he kind of struggled, he's not going to be nearly as popular as what he was for main slate. You got Hodges, who's not going to be popular. And as long as you're last man in, so we're at $7,000 for your last man in. DraftKings, of course, frowns upon putting all 6 players into a lineup on stream. But as long as you're somewhat mindful with your last man in here, you're going to be okay with on the ownership perspective. So by being mindful, you probably don't play a Max Homa, who's going to be by far the most popular play at $7,000. As long as you're making somewhat of an ownership pivot with your last player, perhaps even leaving a couple $100 on the table and going down to $6,800, $6,700 and trying to take somebody that's average to below averagely owned. All of those kind of strategies are how you can make sure that you're not going to duplicate yourself with other lineups and give yourself some extra leverage to move up the leaderboards when your players inevitably hit. So that's what I've got for this live stream, guys. Best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of those leaderboards, whether it's in the big $5 GPP, $25 GPP, or in some of those single entries. Let's run it up on those leaderboards. I hope to see a clean sweep across the board. And we're going to be doing the same thing for rounds 3 and 4 showdown, by the way. So on top of smashing that like button, also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content over the weekend. So as play is finishing up or a little bit after play finishes up, we're going to be doing the similar type of live stream. So round 3 will be pretty similar to what we had here, but round 4 will be adding on top of that from the placement point perspective. And of course, guys, for all the prop and betting stuff for this weekend, make sure to check out my YouTube channel as well. That is LukeDFS. A little bit later on tonight, I'll be going through all the underdog and prize pick stuff for round number 2, which round 1 ended up being a profitable slate for yours truly, which is hard to do at times at these birdie fests. Last week ended up being a really good one as well. Historically, though, these birdie fests are not my specialty, but we've been working extra hard to try and find some value as a result. In round 1, we had some success with doing so. So make sure to stop on by for that live stream a little bit later on. Again, on my YouTube channel for all of that. It's underdog and prize picks. Also matchups on the sports books we'll be covering over there. And we're doing that for round 3 and 4 as well over there. So a lot of live streams, a lot of content getting you guys ready for all of these rounds. But to make sure that you have that information, because at least to my knowledge, not a lot of people in the industry are doing that sort of content. So, I've been doing this for a while. I enjoy doing it. I want to make sure that you guys have all that strategy and info that you need. And regardless of, how many live streams are doing so, like a lot of the other big sites, ShipIt Nation prides themselves on doing all the showdown content. A lot of the other big sites out there can't say the same thing. So if you guys haven't already joined the ShipIt Nation for their showdown projections, my Patreon page as well for the showdown projections, what are you waiting for, right? You guys want to join a website, you want to be a part of a page that actually commit themselves to rounds 2 through 4 showdown. And it's a lot of work, right? It's a whole set of new projections, a whole new set of ownership strategy that you have to do. And it's what the sweaty tryhards are here for, right? That's why I've partnered with the ShipIt Nation, a crew of sweaty tryhards themselves. And I'm one of the sweatiest of the sweaty tryhards that we have in the industry. So check it out if you guys haven't already. Best of luck, as I was saying before. I'll see you guys throughout the rest of the weekend.